Hello, everybody. I want to start by thanking Jane and thanking Jean and thanking John for doing this evening and inviting me here. And I also really want to echo what Nick said about how important it is, particularly in these moments of polarization. I just want to echo what Nick said about how important it is that we have fora for respectful but real disagreements. In a democracy, we have to have disagreements. It's sort of the point of having a democracy. We don't inherit policies from the government and just decide that we like them. We're supposed to argue about them. We're supposed to argue about the state of our country. And we haven't forgotten how to argue in this country, but I do think we've sometimes forgotten how to argue in a way that conveys both real disagreement, but also respect for the other side. And I'm really pleased to have a chance to do this tonight with John in front of all of you, and we're both looking forward to hearing your questions once we lay out our cases. So I've just written a book about the American dream, which you can see on the screen here, which I think is a big part of why Jean asked me to be part of this debate tonight. And I actually want to start by defining the American dream using the original definition, which is now nearly a century old, because I think that frame offers a way to think about our resolution tonight, which Jean has already covered nicely. So the idea of the American dream and really the coining of the phrase comes from 1931, from a book called The Epic of America by an independent historian based here in New York named James Truslow Adams. He'd made enough money on Wall Street that he could stop trading and instead write books, and he did very well as a historian. He won a Pulitzer Prize. And his book, Epic of America, in 1931, he included this new idea of that American dream, as he called it, of a better, richer, happier life for all of our citizens of every rank. And he called it the greatest contribution we, by which he meant the United States, has yet made to the world. And I think there are really three key ideas in that definition. So the first is progress, better, richer, happier. Adams didn't say exactly better, richer, happier than what, but I think it's implicit. He said the idea is that over time, people can enjoy better, richer, happier lives, and they can expect that their children will enjoy better, richer, happier lives than they did. Over the march of time, life gets better. That's progress. The second part of the definition is social mobility, all our citizens of every rank. And I think that is in part subtly a contrast with Europe. The idea that it doesn't matter the station in which you are born in the United States, you can expect to have a better, richer, happier life. And the last part of the definition is this idea that it's distinctive to the United States. It's quite a lovely notion, and it's worth focusing for a minute on the last word on that slide, 1931. He came up with this idea at really the nadir of the Great Depression in this country. It's more than 2 years after the stock market crash, and the country won't begin to pull out of the Depression for several more years. And yet he conveyed a real long-term sense of optimism about the country. And I want to use his definition to speak a little bit about our resolution tonight. And I want to focus on his three words of better, richer, and happier. And I'm going to take them one at a time. I'm going to take them in a slightly different order than he did. I'm going to start with richer. And I want to use them to focus on this question of stagnation, which is a word in our resolution, and inequality, which is another word in our resolution. So let's start with richer. And I actually think the idea that Americans have become richer is the strongest piece of evidence and the strongest argument for the other side of the debate. Americans are not poorer than they were a decade ago. They are not poorer than they were a couple decades ago. But the typical American isn't much richer either when you look at the data. So as you can see on this slide here, what I've got as kind of a benchmark in that bold line is per capita GDP. So that is basically what as a society, our whole economy is producing. And what you can see is that for the very rich in our society, they have made progress at a much, much faster pace than our economy as a whole. The economy has grown a certain amount, and people at the top, and particularly at the very top, have had their incomes, this is after taxes and government benefits, have had their incomes grow much, much more than the economy as a whole. People in the middle have had their incomes grow somewhat more slowly than the economy as a whole, and the bottom 50% has had it grown substantially more slowly than the economy as a whole. And in some ways, I think it comes down to the richer part of this. How should we feel about those lines at the bottom? Is that good enough that people should be happy? And they should say, you know what? The American economy has been great for me. It has not been stagnant. And I think the answer is no. I think Americans are reasonably frustrated by the pace of their incomes. Here's another way to look at it. That again is per capita GDP. You can see median family income trailing GDP, and you can see the pay of top corporate executives vastly exceeding GDP. These two charts I've just shown you come from two different academic studies, very well-regarded academics. This is from a professor at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. The last one was professors at Berkeley. So let's now look at different data in case you don't trust those academic professors. This comes from the Census Bureau. Now we're on a different scale, not percentage change, but we're looking at income levels over time adjusted for inflation. And I would ask you, when you look at the median and you look at the 10th percentile, does that look like stagnation to you? It certainly looks like stagnation to me. Yes, the point of the line at the end is a little bit higher than it was at the beginning. But that is really slow growth. And you can also see the inequality in this chart. The income at the 95th percentile has increased much more. If I was able to get the 99th or 99.9th percentile from the Census Bureau, I would have to expand the chart to show how much it has risen. Here's the Fed, and I'm now switching from income to wealth. Once again, you really have to squint to notice that for most Americans, those in the middle and at the bottom, it has gone up at all. To me, this is pretty strong evidence, or quite strong evidence, for both stagnation and inequality. And just again to point out, it isn't even the strongest evidence. The strongest evidence for stagnation and for inequality, which in our resolution is not simply economic, it is broader than that, is in the non-economic variables. Here's another way to think about it. A child who was born in 1940, she or he had a 92% chance to grow up and make more than her or his parents earned at the same time, the same age. So if you're born in 1940, achieving the American dream by the richer part of it was a virtual guarantee. Even if you went through a divorce, even if you were laid off, as many workers were in the middle of the 20th century, even if you had a health crisis, the odds that you would out-earn your parents were very, very good. This is a paper from the journal Science, a team of professors at Harvard and elsewhere. For a child born in 1980, the odds were only 50%, a coin flip. Again, strong signs of stagnation. So let me come back to the resolution. The stagnation of living standards and soaring economic inequality have become the defining economic trends of American life. You look back at those charts, every one of them shows stagnation for most people and inequality overall. I want to add one point here, which is there are a couple data series that I didn't show you that would have made things look even worse, that would have made wages look as if they had declined for most Americans. I consider those series outliers. There are also some outliers that say if you change the inflation adjustments and use a different one from what the federal government used, everything looks great for Americans. I'm showing you the bulk of the evidence, the Census Bureau, the Congressional Budget Office, the Federal Reserve, the economists publishing in top academic journals. They're all deeply consistent with this notion. Now let's turn to happier. Are Americans happier than they were? How do they feel about the stagnation that is a central part of our political and economic life today? Well, it has been nearly 20 years since a majority of Americans said the country was on the right track. This is from Gallup. We're now down about 20% of Americans who say the country is on the right track. Think about that. Whether the economy is growing or shrinking, whether we have a Republican president or a Democratic president, a strong majority of Americans do not believe the country is headed in the right direction. People are not happy about the direction of the country. What about their own lives? Here's a headline from Gallup. Less than half of Americans very satisfied with their own lives. You can see that is basically the lowest level since Gallup has been doing this over the last couple decades. This isn't just what they say about the country, it's also what they say about their own lives. Here's a question from Pew in which they said, is it still possible to achieve the American dream? Which is a phenomenally low bar. I've written a book about how the American dream is threatened. I would say yes to this question. It is certainly still possible to achieve the American dream. Look at that age breakdown. The yellow is no, and the tan is yes. And what you see is that older Americans who benefited from an economy of earlier decades say that yes, it's still possible to achieve the American dream. Younger Americans, those under 50, as a majority say it isn't possible to achieve the American dream. A poll from ABC News, which instead asks it a little bit, puts a higher bar. Is the American dream a reality? Finds that a strong majority of Americans say that no, it is not a reality, and that the number who think it's a reality has shrunk really substantially over the last couple decades. I love the fact that we are at a forum that celebrates free minds and free people, because one of the central ideas of libertarianism is that we should trust people. We shouldn't have the government or experts or elites telling people what they should believe. We should listen to them and believe that they are right. And so if we listen to Americans and we ask them, how do you feel about your living standards? Do you think they are satisfactory, or are they stagnating? They come back with very clear answers. No, they are not satisfactory, and yes, they are stagnating. And if you sometimes wonder, well, wait a second, what am I really supposed to think about these poll numbers? I would rather think about it in a more vibesy sense. Are Americans happy or not with the state of our economy? That's my response. They are not happy. The Republican Party is traditionally the party that is supposed to be uplifting about the United States of America. The Democrats are the downers who talk about how bad inequality is. 8 years ago, Donald Trump took over the Republican Party, and he has dominated it ever since with a message that is quite clearly about the idea that Americans should not be satisfied with the condition of our country. He talks about carnage. There's a clip of him you can find online where he says, "The American dream is dead." His running mate, J.D. Vance, is very much of this same school. So when the voters of the two parties are picking candidates, they are picking candidates who reflect back to them their own belief that living standards in this country are growing at an unacceptably slow pace, and that the fact that some people are doing better than others is a major problem. Stagnation and inequality. Think about how much Donald Trump talks about elites. Think about how much Kamala Harris and Tim Walz talk about taxing rich people and about corporate price gouging. This is what people are feeling, and this is what the political leaders who our voters choose are reflecting back to them. The final thing I want to talk about is better. Is everyone just wrong? Have the trends of the last few decades been so wonderful that we should just tell Americans to stop whining? And in fact, there isn't stagnation here and things are going great. And when I think about this question, I try to think about it sort of fulsomely. And I've even made a list of things that have gotten better and not gotten better over the last couple decades. There are certainly things that have gotten better. Access to information is better than it used to be. I think religious discrimination in most ways is less of a problem than it used to be, as are other forms of discrimination, racial and gender discrimination. These are all still problems, but I think they're less than they used to be. The air we breathe is cleaner than it used to be. Crime in most cities is lower, although it's come up again recently. But there are also a whole bunch of things that are worse. We have many more extreme storms, as Florida is experiencing. We have a lot of gun violence. We've made less progress than other countries in dealing with vehicle fatalities. Drug overdoses are a much bigger problem than they used to be. Mass incarceration is a bigger problem than it used to be. Chronic pain is a bigger problem. Diabetes. I think our democracy in some ways is weaker than it used to be. So the question is, how do we weigh all these things and think about overall, is life getting better or is it not? Well, I think we should look at the very most important things, the way people live their lives, their basic health, their family structure. And I think in the really biggest ways, there are reasons to feel very alarmed about the state of American society and to believe that it has indeed stagnated and in even some ways have gone backwards. These are rates of loneliness and mental health problems among young people. They were rising even before COVID. If I updated this chart all the way, it would look even worse. Americans are much more likely to feel lonely. Our children are much more likely to have mental health problems than they used to. In terms of teen mental health, we haven't stagnated, we've gone backwards. This is the percentage of children who live with two parents. And I don't in any way want to demean single parents. They are heroic figures. My grandmother raised my dad as a single mom. But as a society, we're better off if more kids grow up with two parents rather than one. That's not an area where we've merely stagnated. We've actually moved backwards in terms of the number of kids who grow up with two parents. What about people's decision about whether to have kids? One of the biggest expressions of confidence in our future that you could possibly make. Our fertility rate has absolutely plunged in this country. And then there is what might be the single best measure of society's health overall, which is how long do people live? In 1980, as you can see at the beginning of this chart, the United States had a normal life expectancy for a rich country. This shows every rich country in the world, life expectancy at birth. The US is the red line. At the beginning, you can see it's sort of in the middle. Japan and Portugal are just included as examples. Our life expectancy in the 1980s started to grow more slowly than in any other rich country in the world. By the early part of the 21st century, we had the worst life expectancy of any country in the world. You can see today, it's not even particularly close. There is no other rich country that has a life expectancy that is close to ours. We're by far the worst off of rich countries in terms of life expectancy. This trend is driven overwhelmingly by the stagnation in life expectancy for people who don't have a four-year college degree. The big dip at the end of this chart is COVID. It's going to bounce back from COVID. But you can see from that chart, this isn't just a COVID story or anywhere close, and other countries are also going to bounce back. So let me just put a fine point on that. We're talking about stagnation in living standards in a country that now has the single worst life expectancy of any rich country in the world and has for almost 20 years, and it isn't especially close. I think the answer for our society has to be to acknowledge people's frustration, acknowledge their anger, not to tell them that they are wrong about stagnation or inequality, but to take this country's enormous strengths, frankly, that no other country in the world has, and use them to fix what is indeed the defining problem of modern American life. Thank you again for having me.